Yeah. So carbon neutrality, like I said, is a very broad subject, and covering it in the given time is going to be a challenge, but I'll do my best. Uh, First of all, I'd like to thank PIC for giving me this opportunity to speak about the issue of net carbon neutrality and how we can take it as a pathway to go into the future. So to start with, we need to first go back to the South Pole, the Antarctic, and understand why this is going to be really essential for us to have an argument on achieving carbon neutrality. So back in 2015, I had the opportunity of visiting the beautiful continent as a 20-year-old student, and having seen the impacts of global warming and climate change in front of your eyes in Antarctica, in a continent where it's not contributing to global warming, but it's still facing the impacts of global warming, really hits you hard. And these are one of the important climate tipping points that we must consider as an argument to achieve carbon neutrality. So let me just quickly explain you why that is the case. This is the Western Antarctic ice shelf, and it is currently melting at a very rapid pace, and it's expected that sea level rise could happen to 3 and 4 meters in the coming century. And that is going to have a massive impact in coastal communities that are living there. Second point is all the oceans, right from the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean, are all confluencing around the continent. So Antarctica actually acts as a whirlpool to circulate the water and the ocean ecosystems. And if the melting of the ice sheets is having any effect on that, is going to trigger irreparable climate impacts. So similarly, there are 12 to 13 other climate tipping points happening around the world. Antarctica is just one case of it. We had on day one, Dr. Roxy Call, who spoke about some of the other climate impacts that we could be facing and how it's going to impact India. So this is the premise why we need to become carbon neutral. This is the general understanding around the globe that because of global warming, we are experiencing climate change. Because of climate change, it's triggering a lot of different tipping points around the world, which we may not be able to come back to. So this is literally a do or die situation for humanity. So what is the general consensus around the world? Why do we really want to get to carbon neutrality? The concept is fairly simple. We are emitting a certain set of emissions into the atmosphere through different sources like fossil fuels. And through net carbon neutrality, we want to remove the equal amount of emissions from the atmosphere or stop the sources of those emissions. So the net impact we are hoping would be nil. It would be cancelled out. So you would, for example, emit 100 tons of emissions and you would save 100 tons of emissions by coming up with a new forest. So this is the broad concept around carbon neutrality. Now, which are some of the major emitters around the world? Now, if you really want to make carbon neutrality a reality, since it's a global problem, we have to understand what areas should we target. So cities currently occupy 2% of the Earth's surface, but are responsible for 70% of the global GHG emissions. That is a very massive contribution to greenhouse gases directly from cities. And these come from different sources, like from energy production, from usage of our transport, management of waste, construction, deforestation, and so on. But the question is, now you must be thinking, how do people actually calculate these emissions? Where do we come up with these kind of figures? So the GHG protocol has laid out a framework. It's broadly divided in 3 parts. Starting from scope 1, that's the direct consumption. This includes emissions from the tailpipes of cars or scooters or industrial furnaces or chimneys. So these are emissions that are directly emitted into the atmosphere. That comes into scope 1. And in the example in the pie chart, you can see for the region of Pune, almost 28% of the emissions are coming from scope 1, so from direct emissions. Second is the scope 2, that's electricity consumption. Now, in order to power a city, you need to have a power station. And not necessarily all the time the power station is going to be located in that city. It could be somewhere far away. But nevertheless, you're still using electricity coming from that power station. So this comes under scope 2. And in Pune region, it contributes to almost 42% of the emissions. And finally, that is scope 3, the indirect emissions. So this comes from usage of fertilizers, different manufacturing processes, and the inbuilt emissions in the material itself. So that comes to almost 30% of the emissions for the Pune region. So cumulatively, in scope 1 and scope 2, we have about 70% of the total emissions. And this is highlighted because it has the best, it is, let's say, the low-hanging fruit to start the decarbonization process. Now, coming to some of the benefits that we have seen on carbon neutrality. First of all, India, since it's a developing country, it has great potential for development. We all support and want development. But if we want to have carbon neutrality as a subset, as one of the targets, we need to ensure low carbon development. And as Mr. Chandrabhushan mentioned in his talk, the RE sector plays a very, very crucial role in it. And there are multiple reforms that we need to take to transition to RE. So renewable energy has a great potential to play a role in decarbonization. Second thing is improving the energy efficiency and reducing energy demand. So that increases the productivity of the tasks that we do. And it also decreases the need for any kind of additional energy in those cases. Third thing is efficient and zero emission logistics and transport. So just to explain this, we're all talking about electric vehicles. It's catching up a lot of pace. And if taxi riders or rickshaw drivers were to adopt EVs, you'll see that they're saving up a lot of money just by switching to electric vehicles. And of course, the charging of these electric vehicles needs to come from renewable energy at the end of the day. But still, even if the power is coming from coal, we are still seeing a slight decrease in emissions because of the efficiency factor. So you need a lot less energy to travel those same 100 kilometers with electric technology. So the impact right from the different spheres of our society is going to be different, and it's going to be advantageous in most cases. So it's going to lead to inclusive development. And one of the main benefits, like it was clearly mentioned in the youth session yesterday, is that we want clean water bodies, we want clean air, clean soil for the future generations. Like I mentioned, there are multiple climate tipping points going on around the world, and it's going to become increasingly difficult if we don't act on some of these basic necessities that we need. It also provides us with a market opportunity. So companies, brands today can improve their environmental performance, market it, sell it from that perspective. Of course, we need to be careful of greenwashing, where companies don't give out more benefits than what's been actually happening. Then building climate resilience, very important to combat the extreme weather events that we're expecting in the coming decades. And finally, it's going to be a very financially sustainable model as well. So today we see solar, that is the lowest cost of electricity production, EVs much cheaper to run and operate. And SEBI has also laid out clear guidelines on environment, social, and governance framework for companies to disclose their performances to the public. And that's going to play a massive impact in how people and the public make different decisions. So coming to the international efforts at place, of course, we've seen a lot of benefits associated with carbon neutrality. So on an international forum, there's been a lot of efforts taken there. Starting with the mechanisms, there's multiple ways in which you can achieve carbon neutrality. So first is carbon offsets. You produce 100 tons of emissions, and you can invest in another project that's saving the similar 100 tons of emissions. So that is carbon offsets. That's one of the ways you can achieve that. Carbon sequestration, again, if you're producing 100 tons, you invest in a forest or you adopt a forest that's saving those 100 tons of emissions. Then cutting down on direct sources of emissions, which is one of the best ways you can cut down on overall emissions. And of course, carbon credits and carbon tax. It's currently not yet legalized or put in place with some framework in India, but we're hoping that this can be taken up. So in Sweden, where they are taking up a lot of carbon tax, they're using this financial resource to invest in climate action. So this is one of the things that we can explore as well. So globally, since cities are one of the major polluting sources, there's been a lot of organizations that have come up to support cities that want to go carbon neutral, like C40's Carbon Neutral Alliance. And the Maharashtra government has signed with the Race to Zero campaign to make 43 Amrit cities within the state carbon neutral in the coming years. So Maharashtra has already taken that first step in at least putting out a dedicated public outreach that we are going to make these cities carbon neutral. And that is, I think, a positive step in the right direction. So finally, the GHG protocol, like I mentioned earlier, it governs the framework of how you calculate your emissions, which is also very important to take into consideration. So now coming to the aspiration, that is, we want to achieve carbon neutrality, we need to have some sort of practical approach. Today, more than 700 cities have already committed to go carbon neutral in the coming years through the Race to Zero campaign, but very handful of them have an actual action plan and strategy on how to get there. So this is a different ballgame altogether. And realizing this, PIC wrote a policy paper back in 2020, which was then inaugurated by our Minister Siddharth Bhagwat, where we try to figure out how Pune metropolitan region as a whole, which includes Pune, the city of Pimpri-Chinchwad, and nearby villages, how this entire region as a whole can become carbon neutral by 2030. And we did this study just before the pandemic with the help of local climate experts in Pune as well. Some of them are soon going to be talking in the following sessions. And what we found out from this study was there are two scenarios in which PMR can develop. The current baseline emissions of PMR is about 26 million tons of carbon emissions. Just to put that in perspective, if you want to save those equal amount of carbon emissions, we need to plant 52,000 kilometers of forests. That's about 7 times the size of the Pune metropolitan region. So going from point A, which is the current scenario, and point B, which is the carbon neutral scenario, there are two paths. First is the business as usual scenario, in where we realized that we could have almost a 3 times increase in the carbon emissions. So taking into account our capacity to naturally sequester the carbon through forests or rivers or lakes in this region, that would leave us with a huge emissions gap of 57 million tons of CO2 emissions equivalent, which will be near impossible to negate just through artificial technologies. So preferably, that is not the way we should definitely go. Second way in which we can develop PMR is a climate action scenario, where we're assuming that we are using renewable energy, that the transport is electrified, that is powered by renewables. We have a zero waste management structure in place. We are building green buildings. So assuming all of these actions are taken within the coming years, we would still have a surplus of 7 million tons of CO2 emissions. This is what the policy paper brought out, which was quite shocking. And to negate those 7 million tons of emissions, we again need to see two scenarios. First is using the natural sequestration capacity, we can still negate 2 million tons of it. But what has really come out is that we still need artificial sequestration. We still need to have some dependency on technologies where we can remove the carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. So this is going to be the need of the hour, so to speak. And that is the best way to achieve carbon neutrality.
Siddharth, if I may interrupt, please wind up in 2 minutes.
Yeah. So the reality of carbon neutrality is that different cities require different solutions, but it's also from the people's perspective, there are different motivations on why people want to become carbon neutral. So one could be ecological, knowing that we need to stop global warming. Second thing is financial, it's good for businesses. We can make an argument for that. On a personal note, yes, it's going to save us a lot of money if we use EVs or solar, for example. And morally, we want to do the right thing. So there can be different motivational factors for different people. And for the study that we are now taking up at PIC, we are now understanding what is the feasibility of making PMR carbon neutral. So this is going beyond the policy paper. We are looking at all these different sectors. We have partnered with local institutions and experts in the Pune region to see what are the technologies and what are the financial requirements of making PMR carbon neutral. So starting from understanding the status quo, we need to determine what is the emissions gap, which we have done. We need to then bring together all the essential stakeholders and start with key pilot projects. So this is a very important step to convert those aspirations into actions. And this report is expected to come out by the end of April or May. So we'll be communicating that accordingly. But this is one of the essential steps that's been taken up, very new step that's been taken up in India, actually. But do we actually need carbon neutrality? Is carbon neutrality the final grail that we should all stick by? We all have seen this graph where this is the historical emissions and this is what our current emissions are at. But carbon neutrality will mean we are emitting, we are saving, we are emitting, we are saving, we are emitting, we are saving. So we might have emission scenario going in a lateral manner. If we really want to stop global warming, our focus in the future should also be to go towards carbon negative. This is a very important step. And of course, nonetheless, carbon neutrality is the first step we need to achieve, beyond which we can think about carbon negativity. And PMR as a region, since it has lots of research institutions, NGOs, think tanks, has a really, really great opportunity to be one of the leaders to make a huge metropolitan region carbon neutral. And we hope that other cities are also able to adopt this and take it forward. So that's it. I'll end here. Thank you very much